And our next speaker is Ralph Cobham, who's going to speak about a project that has been referred to many times already today, which is the Blenheim Park Master Plan. Now, Ralph was the founder of Cobham Resource Consultants, and he enjoyed a 30-year collaboration with Colvin and Moggridge on this project. And I think that's so important. The duration of these projects and their collaborations is critical. Of course, he did benefit from being imbued with a Brownian landscape during his time at school at Stowe. So many thanks. Ralph, please take the podium. Do you want me to press the button? It's just that.
Can you do that?
I'll do that,
yes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Tim and Annabelle. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this wonderful celebration. It's a privilege. Now, the form of my presentation, which has to be short, is as a series of brief questions and answers. And could we have the first slide, please? Now, my first project was in Benghazi, and I can't really talk about that very much, just to say that it wasn't a great success. I was actually on day 2 arrested because I didn't have a pass from the military police, because I was helping Colvin and Moggridge to suss out the planting plan for Gaddafi's military staff college, and the military police didn't recognize the fact that I had a civil pass. So that was a marvelous start, wasn't it, to a collaboration. But the second project, this is just a very quick reminder, but we've had several already, so I don't need to show. This is an aerial oblique. The second one is the features of the actual restoration process. Surveys and analysis on the left-hand side, significantly contributed by Hal Moggridge in relation to the genius loci. In terms of the right-hand side, the functional interests coming together, the land uses and the management issues that arose, and coming up from the bottom, the professional inputs from the Blenheim staff and the external experts, culminating in a long-term master plan 2/3 of the way down and a short-term action plan, because the master plan emerged in 1982 and we were involved for about 30 years thereafter in a series of short-term action plans. Now you may ask, how did the collaboration come about? Well, there was an advertisement by the estate agent on behalf of His Grace the Duke to us and to other firms of normally an open competition to prepare proposals for the landscape restoration, funded by the then Countryside Commission. And that was very important, because without that grant, we wouldn't have got to work, I don't think. What was the stake, you may ask, of the park at the outset? Well, Brown's beeches were aged. Most of the mature oaks were senile. You've seen examples of the Methuselah-like looking ones. Wonderful, but they were relatively few in number. Relatively little new planting had been undertaken. There were extensive areas where there had been conifers implanted on the high forest on the left. And incidentally, I forgot to show you this slide earlier. This was a historic plan which Hal unearthed, produced in 1789 by Thomas Pride. It's one of very few plans that Brown produced. The next slide shows the zones and key features. Well, you have the zones on the left-hand side here. There were 8 in total, each with their own genealogi and individual spirit. And on the right-hand side, the land uses with their priorities in order. And there were 8 of those land uses, conifers and nature conservation, recreation, the stud, the shoot, which gave rise to lots of difficulties, I'm afraid, because it restricted the planting season and it didn't allow thinning of the conifers and so on and so forth. Then there was squirrel damage and Dutch elm disease, and there was siltation of Queen's Pool. All of those things we had to embrace, as well as these functional activities and the visual importance on the left. And the final culmination is of the actual master plan, which you've had reference to, and I will return to that shortly. What were the main professional contributions of Hal, you may ask? Well, there were many. There was historic research of landscape evolution, Henry Wise and the 9th Duke. So there was a palimpsest of restoration required. Then Hal brought, as you will have seen, very strong visual analysis and identification of vistas, which had to be kept open, restoration design, a very good understanding of water as a reflective surface in the landscape, and the engineering of dam design, horticultural expertise near the palace, and finally, most important, as we've witnessed today, a tremendous sense of humour. Can you provide examples of Hal's special contributions? Well, yes. I'm going to sit down for a minute, if I may, to read this. This is paraphrased. Having analysed the documentary evidence, it becomes necessary to assess the on-site techniques by which effects were created. This is what Hal wrote in a publication by James Bond and Kate Tiller on Blenheim, published in the late 1980s. The contemporary driveways through the park revealed at carriage height a series of carefully composed views unfolding one after another. This yielded drawings showing the vistas through open space to more distant landmarks, and that the apparently random location of the clumps of trees around the lake and elsewhere were no accident. They occupy the only places where obstruction of the view could be accepted without detracting from the overall effect. Brown's naturalistic design was based on carefully planned geometric controls, every bit as significant and more complex than those displayed much more obviously by the earlier formal designs of Henry Wise, etc. We do not know how this precision was achieved. It was clearly not done by drawing, of which there were only 4 and a handful of site instructions. My own view, Hal writes, of Brown's method, albeit entirely hypothetical, is that by carrying a 3-dimensional vision in mind, he was able to set out an extremely complex system of views by site instructions. In short, Hal analysed and deeply understands the sophisticated subtleties of Brown's living work of art at Blenheim better than anyone else. If there were to be a Sherlock Holmes prize for landscape detection, Hal would undoubtedly be a hot contender. My next question is, what was the essence of the master plan? Well, we focused on the fourth dimension and also the diversity of age and climax species, namely beech, lime and walnut in the lowland areas of the park, and oak, climax of nearly 1,000 years in the upland, the lowland 200 years. Well, in order to avoid a repeat of the near nude landscape, Double Avenue in 1980, and the Lilliputian landscape that succeeded that, we wanted to ensure that there would be premature felling and replanting in the right locations every 100 years of the inner and outer rows of the avenue and the inner and outer rows, the centre and outer parts of the large features in the park, of which you will see there were large clumps and smaller clumps. And we wanted to do that in order to achieve continuity of cover so that there would never be nudity again. In the High Park, perpetuation of oak was through natural regeneration, properly protected and with bracken control. Did you encounter frustrations? Yes, several, mostly to do with the shoot, but also the shunning of recommended trials to look for alternative species for planting in the central avenue. That was very disappointing. What you may ask were the main lessons. Well, the importance of keeping the estate staff on side at all times. And secondly, the necessity of having a post-nuptial agreement on how the restoration should be sustained, and most particularly how it should be publicized. Finally, how do you rate the collaboration? Well, I think it was broadly successful despite the frustrations. Thousands of trees were planted, lots of trees were regenerated and protected, and now there is sustained management by the World Heritage Site designation, with a management plan reviewed and updated every 10 years. And Hal and I managed to do the first, essentially 30 years of those. Now I wish to end by presenting you, Hal, with a booklet about Anish Kapoor's exhibition last year in Liverpool, as a token of my appreciation for your collaboration with me.
Thank you very much.
Hal, thank you so much. It was a wonderful time of celebration of productivity and entertainment. Thank you.
Thank you.